Thank you for taking the time to watch tonight's Bible study, and I hope that it will be a blessing to you. This evening, we continue the Bible study series titled In Search of the Apostles. And as we look at their stories, I hope that we will be able to see ourselves. I hope that we will be able to identify with these amazing but very human people and draw inspiration to follow Christ as they did. They made an impact in their world. So why can't we do the same? So far in this series, we have covered some general principles of discipleship, and we've looked at the life of Simon Peter, Andrew, James and John, and Philip. Tonight, we look at Thomas. Thomas is one of the more well-known disciples, mainly because of that one famous post-resurrection encounter with Jesus. And it also helps that the Jesus and Thomas story is always the gospel text on the first Sunday after Easter. And we'll get to that famous story in just a few moments. First of all, we know almost nothing about Thomas's background, and we're not 100% sure his name was really Thomas, since Thomas is an English transliteration of the Hebrew word for twin, which is Didymus in Greek. It is possible that Thomas, or twin, is a nickname. There are many sources from early Christian history, and in particular, Eastern traditions that record his name as Judas, but he is referred to as Judas Thomas to avoid confusion with the other Judases, including the infamous one. And we also have no story of Thomas's calling to be a disciple. He simply appears as one of the 12. And other than the listings of the disciples, the only gospel accounts about Thomas come from the Gospel of John. And then all of those stories all happen in the final couple of weeks of Jesus's life before the crucifixion, and then that third final story that took place after the resurrection. So tonight, I'm going to share those three stories of Thomas, and then I'll conclude with some possible takeaways or lessons that we can get from them. The first Thomas story comes to us in John chapter 11, and it's during the last winter of Jesus's life. Jesus and his disciples sort of hide out in a wilderness area near Jerusalem. It was across the Jordan River, and it happened to just be out of the jurisdiction of Pilate. Jesus was in a wilderness area, a hideaway, right outside of Judea's borders. And while they were wintering and sort of hiding out, springtime comes, and messengers arrive telling Jesus that Lazarus, the brother of Martha and Mary, was sick. And I'll pick it up in John 11, verse 6. Yet even after hearing that Lazarus was sick, Jesus remained where he was staying for 2 more days. Finally, he said to the disciples, "Let's go back to Judea." They protested, "Rabbi, it was only recently that they tried to stone you, and you would want to go back there again?" And then skipping down to verse 11, Jesus said to the disciples, "Our beloved Lazarus has fallen asleep. I'm going to Judea to wake him." The disciples objected, "But Lord, if he's only asleep, he'll be fine." Jesus had been speaking about Lazarus's death, but they thought he was talking about actual sleep. So Jesus said very plainly, "Lazarus is dead. For your sakes, I'm glad that I wasn't there so that you might come to believe. In any event, let us go to him." Then Thomas, the twin, said to the rest, "Let's go with Jesus so that we can die with him. The second Thomas story takes place a few days later on the night before Jesus was crucified. Jesus and his disciples are having the famous Last Supper in the upper room. Judas Iscariot has already left the room and has wandered into the darkness, and Jesus begins what we know as the Last Supper discourse. And I'll pick it up in John 14, verse 3. Jesus said, I indeed am going to prepare a place for you, and then I will come back to take you with me, that where I am, there you may be as well. You know the way that leads to where I'm going. Thomas replied, but we don't know where you're going. How can we know the way? And Jesus told him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father. No one comes to the parent except through me. Then the third story is, of course, the most well-known of Thomas's stories. According to the Gospel of John, Jesus first appeared to all of the disciples in the evening of the first Easter Sunday. All of them, of course, except for Thomas. And then in John 20, beginning at verse 24, but Thomas, who was called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, we have seen the Lord. But he said to them, unless I see the marks of the nails in his hands and put my finger in the mark of the nails and my hand in his side, I will not believe. A week later, the disciples were again in the house, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were shut, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. Then Jesus said to Thomas, put your finger here and see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Do not doubt, but believe. Now, some translations phrase it, do not persist in your unbelief, but believe. And then Thomas answered, my Lord and my God. Jesus said to Thomas, have you believed because you've seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe. By the way, Thomas is also mentioned as being in the boat on the Sea of Galilee, along with Peter, Nathanael, James, John, and two other unnamed disciples when Jesus appeared on the seashore and cooked breakfast for them in John 21. But Thomas is just listed because we know the story quickly turns to an encounter of Jesus and Peter. But Thomas is mentioned, but nothing else. So let's go. So those are the three stories. That's it. That's all we know about Thomas. So what are some possible lessons that we learn from these three stories? Well, first, let's go back to the first one, which I believe possibly gives us a totally different image of Thomas, quite opposite of the image of doubting Thomas. Maybe we need to call him Thomas the Brave. In John's account, it is Lazarus's death that leads Jesus to come out of his hideout and enter Pilate's jurisdiction once again. From John's gospel, it's pretty clear that Jesus and his disciples knew that Jesus's life would be in jeopardy if he crossed the borders into Judea again. If scholars are correct that the hymn in Let's Go with Jesus so that we can die with him, if scholars are correct that that hymn refers to Jesus, then we have Thomas making a statement that he is willing to die with Jesus. And if that's so, as I've said a few moments ago, this gives us a totally different image of Thomas. We have a Thomas in John 11 who is strongly committed to Jesus. Scholar F.F. Bruce writes, if his master is to die, Thomas has no wish to survive him. A second lesson from Thomas, comes from Thomas admitting that he did not know what Jesus was talking about when Jesus was talking about, you know the way. And when Thomas asked, how can we know the way? And this lesson is a repeat from last week. Like Philip, Thomas is not hesitant in asking questions. J. Ellsworth Kalis, in his book, The 13 Apostles, which is one of my sources for this study, he writes, quote, if I had been there, I would have been taken by the poetic beauty of Jesus's statement, and I would be afraid to break the spell of the moment. Besides, I would probably have hesitated to confess my ignorance. When someone tells me I know the way somewhere, I agree pleasantly, then begin to worry about getting lost. Not Thomas. He interrupted immediately. And like any good scholar who realized that the teacher was assuming something the student knows when they don't, Thomas raised the question. End of quote. Thomas, like Philip, reminds us that it's okay to ask questions, that God welcomes inquiring minds and hearts. And the question that Thomas asked gave Jesus an opportunity to give an answer that has spoken to every Christian who has ever lived since. So who knows? Maybe your questions will benefit others like Thomas's question has benefited us. And then the third takeaway comes from, of course, the most well-known of the Thomas stories. And those who've been around Spirit of the Cross for some time know that I do not view the story of Thomas's doubt as something negative. As the great theologian Paul Tillich once said, doubt isn't the opposite of faith, it is an element of faith. And the Bible is filled with strong characters who had seasons or episodes of doubt. And that isn't even counting the Psalms, a book that is filled with many and many and many outspoken doubts. Thomas teaches us that it's okay to be honest with the Lord with any doubts that we have. Thomas was not afraid to engage the Lord with his doubts. And note that in the story, Jesus never belittles Thomas. Jesus never lectures Thomas, and Jesus never pronounces his doubt as sin. Instead, Jesus spoke words of peace, and Jesus met Thomas where he was at, even in the midst of his doubt. Jesus knew what Thomas needed, and Jesus offered Thomas the opportunity to work through whatever doubts that still lingered. And in the end, Thomas makes a great confession of faith that equals that of Peter's. This once doubting Thomas now confessed to Jesus, my Lord and my God. So Thomas does leave us an example. Thomas leaves us a pathway to follow in our journey with the Lord. That it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to engage the Lord with our doubts, but just stay with it. And if we stay with it, and if we keep engaged, then we might just come through our times of doubt and questioning with a strong commitment to Christ as Thomas had in John chapter 11. May it be so. Amen.